There was a time, long before the age of maps and machines, when the night sky above the islands shimmered with 7 luminous moons. Their soft glow cascaded across the waters of the archipelago, turning every wave into liquid silver and every forest into a cathedral of light and shadow. In that age, the world was still a conversation between sea, sky, and spirit, and every sound of wind carried meaning. The ancients believed that what hung above was alive, that each moon breathed, watched, and sang to the sleeping earth below. The land, then, was not silent. It murmured with the rhythms of legend, told by firelight in seaside villages where time itself seemed to pause. The old ones spoke of Bathala, the supreme creator, whose will sculpted the mountains and whose laughter birthed the stars. It was Bathala who, moved by compassion, set these 7 moons aloft. He placed them in the firmament as guardians of the night, to protect those who navigated dark waters and to soften the fear that hides in every shadow. Imagine standing at the edge of a tropical shore, the humid wind heavy with the scent of salt and mangrove. Above you, the heavens pulse with those eternal lights, each one brighter and nearer than any star. The people then would look upward and feel both awe and comfort, knowing that life was balanced between creation and chaos. Every moon had a name, each one representing a cycle, a virtue, a story unfinished. Together, they formed a harmony so perfect that even the spirits of the deep watched with envy. But balance never lasts. Beneath the tranquil surface of that prehistoric sea moved something vast, ancient, and unsatisfied. In the caverns below coral and darkness, the Bakunawa stirred. This was no mere beast, but a deity of the abyss, born when the ocean's breath met the ember of the first volcano. Its body was immense, coiling and silver-scaled, its fins crowned like folded wings, its eyes glowing with the reflection of starlight. Yet within that brilliance was hunger, a hunger not for blood, but for beauty itself. The Bakunawa gazed upon the sky and saw the moons dancing across heaven's black mirror. In their radiance, the dragon felt the first spark of longing. Why should light belong to the distant sky, while its own kingdom, the sea, drowned in darkness? Why should Bathala's creations be beyond its reach? These were not the thoughts of a monster, but of a being who had once known its place in the grand design and had grown weary of the silence that came with it. In those nights, the people began to speak of tremors in the deep. They felt the tides grow strange, the fish vanishing as if fleeing unseen terror. The winds changed, and even the birds refused to take flight. They did not yet know the cause, but their elders whispered that the dragon's heart had awakened. It is said that during sacred rites, the babaylans, the priestesses who could hear the voice of the spirits, warned that something was stirring far beneath the sea floor, something powerful enough to challenge the heavens. To understand their fear, you must remember the world they lived in, a world where myth and the mundane were not separate realms. The gods were not distant. They walked among storms and dwelled in the crevices of mountains. To anger one was to risk the unraveling of all things. And yet, Bathala's creation had already sparked envy in another divine heart. The scene was set not for a simple disaster, but for a cosmic rupture, the kind that divides ages. Tonight, as you listen to this tale, let your imagination travel to that moment before the first eclipse. Think of the sky heavy with 7 moons, each one perfect in its place. The ocean, calm as glass, hides beneath it a silent watcher, coiling tighter, preparing for the impossible. It is the breath before the storm, the heartbeat before a scream. And even now, the echo of that ancient tension fills the folklore and songs passed through generations. Before we move deeper into the tale, take a moment to join the circle of those who keep such stories alive. If you are drawn to the forgotten myths of our ancestors, remember to subscribe to Echoes of the Old World. Every story we tell is a bridge to a past that refuses to die. And as you listen, share in the comments where in the world you are hearing this story from. You are part of a vast constellation of listeners scattered across continents, all connected by the same wonder. Let us return to the people of that distant age. Their nights were rituals of reverence. Offerings of fruits, shells, and fragrant smoke rose toward the heavens in gratitude for the moons that warmed the darkness. Every full moon was celebrated as a living presence. Lovers prayed under one, fishermen under another, travelers under yet another. It was said that each moon had its own temperament, some gentle, some fierce, some playful as the sea breeze. Together, they formed a celestial council of light. But deep below, envy festered like a wound. The Bakunawa's realm, once a kingdom of serene mystery, seemed now suffocating. Its waters reflected only fragments of light stolen from above. Legends claim that it surfaced at twilight, only its eyes breaking the horizon. It watched as the moons climbed higher, their reflections glittering on its scales like scattered pearls. And in that shimmering reflection, the dragon saw both its glory and its despair. For beauty unpossessed can drive even a god to madness. In time, the people noticed signs. The tides grew erratic. Currents twisted unnaturally, pulling boats toward unseen depths. They told stories of whirlpools that sang, of waters that glowed faintly as if haunted by the moonlight itself. Fishermen began to throw charms of bronze into the sea, desperate to appease whatever spirit haunted their waters. The elders warned them never to sail under the seventh moon, for on that particular night, the barrier between realm and abyss grew thin. And then it happened. On a night painted with luminous clouds, when the 7 moons hung like ornaments above the archipelago, the ocean swelled as if swallowed by its own shadow. The air grew still. Then came a roar, not of wind, but of something rising, ancient and colossal. The Bakunawa breached the surface, scales ablaze with borrowed starlight, mouth open wider than any horizon. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. What followed would become the first eclipse. The dragon struck at the nearest moon, devouring its light in one terrible motion. The stars dimmed. The waves trembled. The people screamed and beat upon their drums, their gongs, their very walls, pleading for the light to return. But the darkness persisted, so complete that even the gods seemed absent. Only when the cries reached heaven itself did the moon reappear, pale and trembling, torn from the dragon's jaws. When dawn finally broke, silence reigned across the islands. The people knew that the night would never again be safe. They counted the moons and saw only 6, glowing faintly above the bruised horizon. And in that moment, legend ceased to be tale and became truth. The Bakunawa had tasted light, and its hunger would not end there. Thus begins the long struggle between the heavens and the depths, between the guardians of light and the forces that crave it. The Bakunawa would rise again and again, each time claiming more of the celestial order. But for now, as we end this first chapter, remember the lesson carried in those ancient waves. Even divinity can envy beauty, and even beauty can awaken ruin. Stay with us as we journey further into this myth's unraveling. The story of the Bakunawa is not one of monsters, but of longing, loss, and the fragile balance between creation and chaos. And as you look tonight toward the moon hanging above your own skies, perhaps, just perhaps, you will wonder if somewhere beneath the waves, the dragon still dreams of its 7 stolen lights. Before the dragon's jealousy tore the heavens, there was only creation, vital, calm, and endless. Bathala reigned over that boundless stillness, the breath of all existence caught between the first dawn and the silence that followed. He was not a god fashioned in humanity's image, but rather the voice of the cosmos itself, the eternal pattern that binds sea, mountain, and starlight. Where his will turned, islands rose from the deep. Where his gaze lingered, rivers found their courses through sleeping forests. And where his compassion fell, life began to stir. It was said that in the beginning, the world was half-formed, wrapped in a twilight unable to distinguish night from day. Creatures wandered restlessly, neither waking nor dreaming, confused by the perpetual dusk. Bathala, moved by their weariness, looked upon the empty sky and sighed. From within his breath, 7 sparks appeared, fragile and shimmering like tears suspended in darkness. With deliberate grace, he set each spark upon the firmament, and from them bloomed the first 7 moons. Each moon was unique. One shone with the amber hue of harvest fields, warm and welcoming. Another glowed azure, cool as mountain mist. The third was pale and silver, serene and cold, its light reflecting across the seas. The fourth carried the faint blush of coral. The fifth gleamed with a subtle green, echoing the forest canopy. The sixth glimmered faintly golden, while the 7th, smallest but most radiant, burned with a white so pure that even the stars dimmed beside it. Together, they became Bathala's gift, 7 living lanterns hung above a newborn world. To the early people of the islands, these moons were not mere ornaments. They were guardians of harmony. Oral tradition tells of 7 seasons guided by their rhythms, 7 tides that shaped the fisherman's fate, and 7 forms of prayer that aligned mortal hearts with the divine. When farmers looked upward, they sought which moon watched over their planting. When lovers met by the sea, they whispered vows beneath whichever moon mirrored their emotions. Each phase of life intertwined with that celestial order. In the heart of the forests, the Babylans taught that the moons were sisters. They danced through heaven in unity, watching over the creation below. At night, their light washed over the mountains like holy water, purifying and protecting. When storms swept the islands, villagers believed it was the moons shielding them from the jealous whispers of spirits who despised the living. The cycle of light and darkness was a sacred conversation between Bathala's gifts and the mortal world that needed them. The 7th moon, brightest of all, was considered the soul of the sky. It was said Bathala placed a fragment of his own spirit within her glow. That light was not heat, not fire, but pure essence, the breath of eternity itself. Those who meditated beneath it felt visions of things unseen. Ancestors walking near rivers of eternal calm, creatures of the sea rising to speak in forgotten tongues, and the slow breathing of the world's unseen heart. It was no wonder that this particular moon would become the obsession of the being who lurked below the waves. Bathala's work was delicate, yet absolute. Night after night, the 7 moons drew a web of stillness across the horizon. Their reflections shimmered upon lagoons and coral reefs, guiding sailors lost among the islands. The balance was flawless, as though creation itself hummed in perfect tune. In this balance lay peace. The forests thrived, the oceans offered their bounty, and the people felt the world itself breathing alongside them. There was no hunger yet for dominance, no desire beyond harmony. But balance is the rarest and most fragile of all divine creations. For while the world enjoyed peace, restlessness stirred among the silent depths below. Even Bathala knew that perfection can endure only by facing what lies in shadow. His 7 moons were not meant to remain forever untouched. They were mirrors, and mirrors attract eyes. Every gift, in time, invites envy. Stories say that Bathala foresaw the coming of the Bakunawa, though he did not prevent it. Some believed this was part of his design, that every piece of creation, no matter how luminous, must confront its darkness. Others argued that Bathala's compassion blinded him, that he underestimated the hunger sleeping beneath the sea. Yet, in all versions, there is agreement on one truth: no light remains untested. It was inevitable that one day, something would rise to claim what was never meant to be claimed. On clear nights, when all 7 moons danced together, the villagers sang hymns of gratitude. The sound of bamboo flutes and hollow drums echoed across valleys and rivers. They believed that melodies kept the harmony intact, pleasing Bathala and reassuring the moons of humanity's devotion. When clouds obscured the sky, the songs became urgent prayers, voices trembling in the dark. The earliest mythmakers taught that music bridges the worlds of gods and mortals, a thread of sound that even the abyss cannot sever. The moons were not silent witnesses. Their light, described in myth as sentient, fell over fields like memory, reminding all living things of their origins. The farmers, the fishers, and the dreamers shaped their existence around their cycles. Children were named after the moon's colors, and each community chose a guardian moon as its spiritual beacon. The smallest island might honor the green one, while another revered the white. In this way, the people and the heavens existed in quiet partnership. But this union between light and life also marked the beginning of distance. For with each moon came a law, the law of reflection. It was said that nothing created by Bathala could look directly upon its own perfection without consequence. The seas, therefore, could never fully contain the moons. Their reflection upon the water's surface was both blessing and curse, a glimpse of something desired yet forever beyond reach. It was from this unreachable beauty that the Bakunawa's sorrow was born, a sorrow that would soon turn to wrath. If you stood then on a cliff overlooking the great sea, you would have witnessed the slow dance of 7 celestial sisters. Their radiance turned the waters into moving mirrors, each ripple carrying a shard of starlight. To witness that view was to believe in order, in the tenderness of creation. No one could imagine that this endless beauty would one day fade. Consumed by a being who envied what he could never become, the serenity of creation carried, unknowingly, the seed of its undoing. Bathala's creation myth teaches more than origin. It warns of balance unmet. From the moment he exhaled those 7 spheres of light, the cosmos was split into opposites, above and below, light and shadow, stillness and hunger. The people who inherited this world sensed that living between such forces required reverence. Every ritual, every festival, every whisper of prayer was a reaffirmation that harmony depends not on dominance, but on respect. In time, the story of Bathala's gift became the moral compass of the islands. Parents reminded children to walk gently, speaking of how easily beautiful things can vanish. Elders told travelers to thank the heavens before each journey, honoring the moons that guide even through storm. The myth infused life with accountability, the understanding that existence is borrowed light. and borrowed light must be tended carefully lest it be lost. This belief shaped a culture grounded in humility before both gods and sea. As centuries passed, the people no longer remembered every detail of the first age. Yet the ritual endured. When the moon rose full, drums echoed once more. Fires reflected her face across the dark water. Songs in fading dialects carried Bathala's name to the horizon. Even as the dragon stirred beneath, the people remained bound to that ancient covenant of gratitude. They could not know that their devotion would soon be tested beyond endurance. Thus, Bathala's creation stands as a reminder of duality. The 7 moons symbolized harmony, but harmony exists only in tension. To sustain it, Bathala trusted both gods and mortals alike to play their roles in balance. The coming of the Bakunawa, though tragic, was not mere disruption. It was transformation. For without the shadow of longing, the gift of light would never be fully seen for what it was: fragile, sacred, and endlessly worth defending. And so ends this chapter in the story of creation. The heavens still shine, though dimmer each night. The sea still whispers, though its undertone grows restless. Bathala's 7 moons remain suspended in memory, their glow shimmering across myth and time. Yet something below already dreams of ascending, a serpent divine, a hunger eternal. The perfection of heaven has been granted, and the abyss has begun to awaken its claim. Beneath the rippling surface of the ancient seas, far below the reach of sunlight, a power older than memory stirred in silence. In that abyss lived the Bakunawa, the sea dragon whose name would one day echo through the islands as both curse and prayer. It was not merely a creature, nor only a god, but something that existed between, born of the collision between the chaos of the deep and the order of creation above. Its body coiled endlessly in the darkness, silver scales brushing against volcanic stone, its breath releasing clouds of mist that shaped the tides. To speak its name was to summon visions of endless depth and desire. The Bakunawa's eyes were its first betrayal. Legends describe them as twin orbs that glowed faintly blue, shimmering like captive moons beneath the sea. They pierced through darkness as if the water itself bent to make room for their gaze. Some tales claim that when the dragon blinked, whirlpools formed, dragging lost ships down into oblivion. Others say its heartbeat could be heard through conch shells, a slow, pulsing reminder that the ocean was alive and watching. Even before it rose to challenge the heavens, the Bakunawa was already a sovereign of fear. Its head was adorned with 2 great horns, curved like the crescent moon it would later covet. Fringed fins ran along the length of its spine, each shimmering with faint light, marking it as a creature of divine descent. Unlike the monsters of foreign epics, the Bakunawa did not breathe fire. It breathed storms. When it exhaled, the winds howled across the coasts, and the seas churned with restless energy. The air itself seemed to tremble beneath its sighs, as if the world resented the audacity of such power lingering unnoticed for so long. For ages uncounted, the Bakunawa dwelled unseen, coiling around volcanic vents that glowed like the hearts of stars. It was said to have been born from the marriage of the sea and Bathala's discarded breath, the fragment of divine essence that sank instead of soaring to the sky. Thus, its existence was half sacred, half forsaken. Its immortality was a gift without joy. For though it was born divine, it had no realm to rule. The oceans belonged to spirits and lesser deities who feared it, yet none dared to challenge it. Isolation became its crown, and silence its inheritance. From its domain, The dragon watched the surface world through reflections, its only window into beauty. When the 7 moons rose above the water, the reflection of their light pierced even the abyss. That light reached the dragon's eyes like spears of memory, awakening emotions beyond comprehension. Pain, admiration, jealousy. They mingled inside the creature like converging tides. It saw in the moons what it could never have: freedom, grace, and recognition. For all its might, the Bakunawa lived in obscurity, its magnificence unseen by mortals. Whispers from the underwater spirits tell of the moment envy took root. On one sacred night, the 7 moons aligned perfectly across the heavens, their reflections shimmering as 7 paths upon the sea. The Bakunawa rose above the surface, its colossal body breaking through the veil of foam. It gazed upon the full array of Bathala's lights, and something within it broke. The perfection of the moons was unbearable, their beauty a reminder that the sky's glory mocked the depths. The dragon's heart ached, and from that ache, its destiny was written. That night marked the first time the Bakunawa saw its own reflection illuminated by the moon's light. The sight was terrible and magnificent. Its scales gleamed like molten silver, the horns glistening as if forged by lightning. For a fleeting moment, it mistook itself for one of the celestial bodies, bright, absolute, divine. But as the clouds drifted and distorted its image, realization came. What glittered above was purity eternal, and what lurked below was exile. The shame of that awareness sank deep into the dragon's soul, fusing envy with longing. Yet, the Bakunawa's hunger was not born entirely of malice. Some myths say it adored the moons, seeking them not to destroy, but to possess them, believing that by swallowing their light, it could end its solitude. Others describe its desire as a form of retribution. If Bathala denied it a place among the stars, it would tear down the heavens themselves. In both tales, the act that would follow, a leap of defiance against the cosmic order, was less an attack and more a desperate yearning for recognition. Those who worshipped the old gods understood the sea's temperament as the dragon's moods. When tides rose unnaturally high, they whispered that the Bakunawa was restless. When nights were eerily calm, they said it slept beneath the coral cathedrals. Sailors left offerings of salt and shell upon the waves to appease it. They knew that beneath their fragile boats lingered a power no human could defy. Whole generations learned to treat the ocean not as path, but as threshold, a living boundary between the safe and the sacred. Over time, the Bakunawa became more than a creature. It became a mirror for humanity's own hidden desires. In it, people saw their longing for the unattainable, their envy of light meant for others. Its legend was not merely a warning, but an intimate confession written into the soul of a people who understood that beauty often invites suffering. Each villager who lifted their eyes toward the full moon felt some echo of that same hunger. An ache without language, an admiration tinged with pain. Far beneath those thoughts, the dragon's body wrapped itself tighter around pillars of volcanic stone. Its scales brushed against glowing vents, scattering light like stars trapped beneath the waves. It dreamed of breaking the boundary, of tasting the air above. Each dream was longer than the last, stretching into centuries. The divine sleeping serpent became myth to mortals, but in the silence of the sea, it was only waiting. The desire for light is patient, and in the heart of the Bakunawa, patience was endless. The Babaylans, who mediated between worlds, began to sense a shift in the spiritual balance. During rituals, they would tremble, their eyes turning milky white as they spoke of currents darker than any night. The gods of the mountains whispered of an approaching rebellion from below. Even Bathala's own messengers grew uneasy, their prayers wavering like smoke in strong wind. Yet none dared to challenge the dragon's rest. What could even the divine do against a being whose hunger was older than envy itself? In the world above, life continued unaware. The moon still danced across the sky, the villagers sung beneath their glow, and lovers made vows under their watchful eyes. The difference now was unseen. The serpent had noticed. That noticing alone changed everything, for awareness is the seed of action. The 7 moons, radiant in their innocence, had no defense against fascination. Beauty, after all, is both a gift and a curse. The heavens glimmered without fear, not realizing they were already being hunted by the one who loved them most. And so began the silent years, when legend and warning merged. Fishermen told of a faint glow that sometimes flickered beneath their boats, blue and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. When storms passed suddenly without warning, old men muttered that the dragon had turned in its sleep. Mothers hushed their children at the sound of crashing waves, saying that noise might wake the unseen one. Superstition and faith wove into the same tapestry, each thread pulled taut by tension between awe and terror. To look at the story now is to recognize the complexity of the Bakunawas. It was neither villain nor savior, but embodiment of yearning, the universal hunger for what lies beyond reach. Every civilization creates such beings, reflections of their deepest fears and desires. For the pre-colonial Filipinos, the ocean was both lifeblood and abyss, nurturing and consuming. To imagine a god serpent within it was to give form to the duality they lived with daily. Survival balanced over peril, reverence balanced over dread. Thus, the Bakunawa remained patient within its endless kingdom, coiled around the bones of mountains no mortal had ever seen. It waited as centuries passed, lulled by the songs of whales and the echoes of forgotten prayers. Yet the moons continued their endless waltz above, uncaring, unattainable, mocking in their serenity. The more the serpent watched, the fiercer its longing grew. Its envy hardened into resolve. It would rise again, not merely to see, but to claim. By the time the surface dwellers felt the sea stirring, it was already too late. The Bakunawa's slumber ended with a tremor felt across the archipelago, strong enough to split coral reefs and send shoals scattering in panic. The moonlight, reflected upon the waves, quivered as though it feared what was coming. The dragon uncoiled, its mighty form gliding upward, drawn by the shimmering temptation above. What began as longing now burned as obsession. The story pauses here, at the threshold between desire and disaster. The Bakunawa is no longer legend beneath the water, but a force poised to breach the world of men. In its rise lies not just the tale of a dragon, but the enduring truth of every creation, that what is born from light inevitably seeks its reflection in darkness. And as the 7 moons watched from their high sanctuary, they too must have felt something stir. A shadow moving below, vast and inevitable, preparing to leap. The night it happened began as any other. A calm sky, a sea at rest, and 7 moons shining above, like lanterns of prophecy. Fishermen had returned early, their boats anchored along the shore where drifting lights shimmered on the water. The villages were wrapped in stillness softer than sleep. Children played beneath the moonlight until the elders called them home, and the sound of lullabies mixed with the sigh of distant waves. No one knew that beneath those waters, the oldest dream of the world was preparing to awaken. In the abyss, the Bakunawa uncoiled after an age of silence. Its massive body undulated through the black water, stirring ancient currents long forgotten by the earth. The seabed trembled as its coils brushed volcanic stone, and the creatures of the deep fled before it. Above this movement, the surface of the ocean began to bulge, slow and deliberate, as if a continent itself were breathing. Each wave carried with it a strange hum, a rhythm that no ear had ever heard, but all life could feel, pulsing through bone and tide alike. At first, the people thought it was a storm forming beyond the horizon. The air grew humid, heavy, and still, suffocating even the whisper of wind. The elders gazed upward, confused by the absence of stars near the seventh moon, the brightest of Bathala's creations. It seemed to tremble slightly, as though a shadow had passed between it and the world below. A priestess, her hair woven with shells, fell to her knees upon the sand. Her eyes widened with dread as she felt the waves draw backward, exposing coral and seaweed that had not seen air in centuries. Then came the roar. The sea rose in a vast wall, luminous foam blooming like white fire along its crest. From its heart emerged the Bakunawa, immense and shimmering, its horns glinting with a reflection of 7 lights. It broke the surface with chaos and grace, a beast yet divine, water cascading from its body like endless rain. Those who witnessed it could not speak. Their voices froze in their throats, for what they saw belonged neither to nightmare nor to faith. It was the will of the abyss made flesh. The Bakunawa lifted its head toward the heavens. Drops of seawater fell from its scales like tears, catching the moonlight and sending fractured reflections across the waves. For an instant, it seemed to hesitate. Legends say that the dragon whispered then, a sound so low that even the gods strained to hear. It was a lament, a confession of awe at the beauty it would soon destroy. But as that thought faded, hunger consumed wonder. The creature opened its jaws to the heavens, and the sea followed its breath. When the Bakunawa lunged, its body blotted out half the sky. Its mouth opened wider than the horizon, revealing the dark without end. The seventh moon, radiant and pure, seemed to tremble. A low humming filled the air, the sound of cosmic order cracking. Then, in one impossible motion, the dragon swallowed the moon whole. The world plunged into shadow so absolute that even fire lost its courage. The stars vanished as if they had been snuffed out by a single exhale, and the earth groaned beneath the weight of the sudden dark. The people screamed. Many fell to the ground, believing the end of days had come. The priests ran toward the shore, torches flickering weakly against the suffocating gloom. They banged bamboo sticks against stones, desperate to awaken the sky. Mothers clutched their children, whispering prayers to Bathala, to the wind, to anything that might listen. Even the animals howled in terror, their instincts recognizing a shift far older than memory. Never before had such silence followed such noise. In the sky above, a ring of shadow crowned the dragon's triumph. The sixth moon dimmed, trembling beside the wound where its sister had been. From the mountains to the sea, an eerie glow painted everything in silver gray. Rivers shimmered like veins of light bleeding across the land. To the watcher's eyes, the world seemed suspended, neither living nor dying, but waiting. Time itself lost its meaning beneath that unnatural eclipse. Far above, within the swallowing dark, the dragon felt triumph and emptiness entwined. It had captured beauty, consumed light, yet found no satisfaction within its throat. Instead, it felt the cold pulse of divine fury. Bathala's gaze fell upon the sea, and in that instant, the dragon realized that some hungers are punishments disguised as desires. It roared, but the sound was swallowed by the void it had created, echoing like thunder trapped within a hollow sky. Meanwhile, the humans below fought to reclaim the light. The elders remembered fragments of old songs, hymns once offered to the heavens when storms raged. They shouted for the others to bring drums, gongs, and tin plates. Soon the dark was filled with chaotic rhythm. The clang of metal, the pounding of wood, the furious dance of desperation. The people believed that noise could awaken Bathala, could frighten the Bakunawa into releasing its prey. Every heartbeat became percussion, every cry became prayer. The sea raged in response. Waves crashed against the coasts as if the dragon thrashed in confusion. Clouds tore apart from unseen winds, and streaks of lightning split the sky without thunder. Within that blinding tumult, the priestess who had first knelt on the shore stepped forward. She raised her voice above the storm, her chant weaving through the chaos. Her words called the names of the 7 moons, invoking their unity. The others followed her rhythm, their voices joining into a single sound that carried across the islands like an echo of creation itself. High above, the Bakunawa faltered. The vibrations of human defiance reached even its divine ears. The sound was unfamiliar, neither prayer nor curse, but something raw, survival. The dragon recoiled slightly, its jeweled eyes flickering with doubt. It opened its mouth, perhaps to roar again, but the resonance of the people's noise pierced through its pride. A beam of pale light escaped from between its fangs, weak at first, then brightening as the chant grew stronger. The release was sudden. With a deafening cry that split the horizon, the Bakunawa expelled the moon. It shot across the sky like a comet reborn, trailing silver fire before resuming its rightful place among its sisters. The people fell silent, staring upward as the darkness lifted. The air felt cleansed, heavy with the scent of rain and salt. Across the waters, the dragon's silhouette slithered downward, retreating into the deep with a final shudder. The first eclipse had ended, but the memory of its terror would never fade. Dawn came like a hesitant promise. The sun rose crimson, reflecting upon a sea still disturbed by the battle of divine wills. Some rejoiced, claiming Bathala had saved them. Others wept, whispering that the moon's light was no longer as bright as before. The priestess looked to the horizon and saw ripples glimmering there, the remnants of the dragon's breath. She knew then that the story had not ended, only begun. For hunger rarely dies once fed, it merely dreams of more. That day, the people made a vow. Never again would they greet an eclipse in fear and silence. From then on, whenever the moon began to darken, they would shout, drum, and sing to drive away the Bakunawa. The act became ritual, part warning, part remembrance. Each sound struck against the night would echo that first defiance, the reminder that even mortals hold a voice strong enough to shake the heavens. It was how they kept the dragon at bay, not through power, but through unity. In the centuries to come, the tale of that night would weave itself into every island's lore. Children would be told that the moon's scars were teeth marks, proof of the dragon's hunger. Sailors would claim to hear its hum beneath their hulls on moonless nights. And poets would write that every eclipse is the moment the Bakunawa returns to test humanity's resolve. The myth was not just about darkness swallowing light. It was about fear transformed into resilience. Thus, the first eclipse became the cornerstone of both legend and ritual. It taught mortals that terror could give birth to meaning, and that defiance could forge tradition. The Bakunawa, though defeated, remained eternal within the telling, its presence lingering each time the sky dimmed. Somewhere beneath the endless sea, it still waited, bound not by defeat, but by anticipation. For the dragon knew that as long as the moon shone, longing would endure. And the world, in turn, knew that light is precious only because there is something always waiting to devour it. The first eclipse left the world trembling. Though the moon returned to its rightful place, its once flawless brilliance now bore faint scars, lines that shimmered differently from the rest of its surface. The villagers believed these to be reminders of the dragon's teeth, proof that the sky itself had tasted fear. For months afterward, the people looked upward each night, praying that peace would remain. But the Bakunawa, deep beneath the restless waves, had learned something sacred. Light could be devoured. In the years that followed, calm became an illusion. The seas rarely rested, their tides unpredictable and moods volatile. Fishermen spoke of strange lights appearing under their boats, flickering like submerged stars. Migrating whales vanished from familiar waters, and even the seasoned sailors began to avoid night crossings during full moons. Across the islands, Babaylans warned that the dragon's hunger had only begun. It had tasted divinity once, and nothing born of the sea or sky could fully satisfy such a hunger again. The Bakunawa's absence did not bring safety. It brought anticipation. Each night carried a subtle pressure, as if the air itself remembered what had come before. The moon, now cautious, seemed to move differently through the heavens, its light faintly dimmer, as though it feared being watched. Then, one night, the second moon vanished without warning. There was no roar, no storm, no tremor, only sudden absence. The people looked up and saw 6 lights instead of 7. A great silence fell across the islands. When the truth reached the priestesses, they gathered at the shore under veils of smoke and salt. Their chants rose to heavens that offered no reply. They cast offerings into the sea, fruit, pearls, polished coral, hoping to soothe the unseen rage beneath. But no sound returned, no sign of appeasement. It was as if the ocean itself refused to speak. The second eclipse had come not as a spectacle of terror, but as an invisible theft. This silence frightened them more than the roar that had shaken their ancestors years before. Over the following seasons, the pattern began. One by one, the moons disappeared, swallowed by the sea's unseen throat. Each absence came with new anomalies. The tides grew erratic, coastal forests flooded without reason. Strange storms emerged from cloudless skies. Villages found the bones of whales stranded far inland, as if flung there by impossible waves. The world's balance began to fray. Plants flowered out of season, nights grew colder. The people understood that Bathala's design was unraveling thread by thread. The dragon's hunger had evolved into obsession. As each moon vanished, the Bakunawa grew larger, stronger, its scales gleaming with captured light. Within the deep trenches of the ocean, its body was said to glow faintly, coiled amidst fragments of the moons it had devoured. The spirits of the sea refused to approach it, terrified by the power radiating from its form. They said its eyes now mirrored 2 captured moons, forever turning within like imprisoned souls. The deep had crowned its new ruler, but the crown was made of the stolen light of heaven. Elders across the islands began to record the disappearances through story and song. They did not measure time in years anymore, but in moons lost. The eclipse of the third moon marked what came to be known as the Age of Shadowed Tides. By the fourth moon, entire tribes had abandoned the coasts, traveling inland to escape what they feared was divine retribution. Yet even far from the sea, they could feel the sorrow of the heavens. The night sky looked thinner, lonelier, as though grieving the loss of its companions. Not all accepted the destruction as inevitable. In the distant south, a group of Babaylans gathered in fevered secrecy. They claimed to have received visions from Bathala himself, a command to create a barrier that would defend the final moon from the dragon's reach. They fasted for 7 days, using coral dust and sacred ash to weave charms said to mimic lunar light. At the end of their ritual, they cast these charms into the sea, believing they would form a shield of brightness around the sky's last guardian. But when the 5th moon disappeared, their faith shattered along with it. The stories describe those years as a slow undoing of the world. Crops failed beneath a sky missing its rhythm. Fishermen who once relied on the moons for navigation found only black horizons and wandering currents. Children born in those generations grew up never seeing 7 lights above, only fading remnants and a sky that seemed weary. Still, the people continued their rituals, refused to abandon the songs of defiance their ancestors had taught them. Because even fading hope is a kind of resistance. The Babaylans interpreted the moon's devouring not as punishment, but as parable. They said the Bakunawa represented humanity's own temptation, the longing to possess what was meant to be admired from afar. Each lost moon was a lesson, a reflection of a virtue consumed by desire. The 1st moon symbolized curiosity, the 2nd envy, the 3rd pride, and so on. When only 1 moon remained, they warned, the world would face its final test. The confrontation between reverence and greed, between the will to protect and the instinct to claim. Deep underground, the earth itself began to echo the chaos above. Volcanoes awoke after centuries of dormancy, their red glow staining the newly moonless nights. Some saw this as Bathala's rage, his fury boiling through stone. Others believed it was the earth mourning, its molten heart crying out for balance. In one tale, villagers fleeing an eruption saw a massive shadow moving beneath the lava's reflection on the sea. They claimed the Bakunawa swam close to shore, rising briefly so that its colossal eye broke the surface. It stared at the remaining moon in silence, waiting for its moment. By the time only 2 moons remained, the world had changed beyond recognition. Nights were darker and colder, fear a constant companion. The remaining moons hung far apart in the sky, as though seeking distance from each other. The people no longer sang freely. Their songs had turned into laments, quiet echoes of faith half remembered. Trade between islands ceases as the seas became unpredictable. The ocean, once a blessing, now felt like a mouth sealing shut. Then the 6th moon vanished in a single night of fury. Unlike the others, its disappearance was seen across all the islands. The waters glowed red as if bleeding light. Thunder rolled without clouds, and waves climbed higher than any memory could recall. When morning arrived, the people found devastation, but also a strange, peaceful hush, the calm that follows surrender. The sky now carried 1 moon, pale and wounded, solitary above the ruins of its siblings. It is said that Bathala wept then, his tears falling as rain for 7 consecutive nights. Rivers swelled, cleansing the land of what remained of the dragon's wrath. Those who survived called that storm the baptism of the last light. For a time, they believed the Bakunawa had exhausted its strength. Songs once again filled their villages, now softer, filled with sorrow rather than celebration. They built temples of coral and driftwood along the shore, each a prayer carved against the possibility of another eclipse. But the peace was illusion. Even as offerings burned on the altars, a familiar vibration returned to the deep, a heartbeat too vast to belong to. The dragon still stirred, its hunger not diminished, but refined. It had swallowed 6 moons and now dreamed only of the 7th, the purest, the brightest, the one said to contain the heart of Bathala himself. The final pursuit would not be one of passion, but of destiny. For what begins with longing always ends with confrontation. Those who told the story around their fires spoke of cycles. Creation followed by destruction, silence followed by song. They said that each lost moon had seeded something in humanity. The memory of endurance, the instinct to act, the courage to defy even the inevitable. The Bakunawa had not consumed hope. It had sharpened it. And in doing so, the dragon unknowingly forged the same weapon that would challenge it in the end. The will to fight back was born from the darkness it created. Tonight, when you look up and see the single moon that remains, remember what once was. The stories say that if you strain your eyes, you can still see faint halos where the other moons once drifted, lingering like ghosts of light. They are not gone completely, only waiting. For in every cycle of loss, there remains the promise of return. And perhaps, somewhere beneath the stirring ocean, the Bakunawa too waits. Not merely to devour again, but to witness whether the last light will stand or fall, whether humanity will fear or resist the shadow rising from the waves once more. The night of the 7th moon's peril began with silence, a silence heavier than the weight of the sea itself. The sky was cloudless, the stars like cold embers scattered across a dark tapestry. Fishermen refused to cast their nets, and villages along the coast lay still, candles burning in guarded windows. Every soul could sense what approached, though none spoke it aloud. The shadows under the water shifted, alive with the pulse of something vast stirring once again. In the depthless abyss, the Bakunawa turned in its sleep, each coil dragging against the crushed bones of mountains. Its eyes, twin orbs of stolen light, opened slowly, unveiling the reflection of the lone moon left above. That solitary sphere called to it, not merely as prey, but as destiny. The dragon's hunger had transformed into obsession. Its dark heart ached with longing to possess the last piece of the heavens. Within that longing resided an ancient grief, misunderstood by mortals, but no less consuming. The ocean shuddered before the creature rose. Whales fled into the farthest currents, and deep trenches released bubbles that burst like thunder upon the surface. The sky began to dim long before the dragon breached. The moon trembled as its silver light flickered like a candle in the wind. Those who looked out to sea swore they saw an outline moving beneath the water, an impossible serpentine form longer than the distance between islands, crowned with horned fins that glowed faintly in the dark. The deep exhaled, and the night held its breath. Then, splitting the horizon, the Bakunawa emerged. Water cascaded from its body like molten glass, and the air vibrated with its roar, so low that waves rose in rhythm with the sound. Its scales shimmered with unnatural brilliance, reflecting both the moon's light and the darkness around it. The creature's eyes fixed on the sky, their glow steady and terrible. Those who saw this moment would speak of it for generations. The final confrontation between heaven's perfection and the sea's endless desire. The moon began to wane before any mouth could form a prayer. It was not an eclipse this time, it was annihilation. The dragon's immense jaw opened, revealing depths that seemed to swallow the very concept of light. The moonlight bent toward that hunger, drawn as if by gravity itself. Across the islands, people fell to their knees, knowing that their songs, their offerings, their faith, all were powerless before such divine appetite. Yet in despair, something stirred among them, memory echoing like distant thunder. In a small coastal village, elders gathered the people in the central clearing. At their command, drums were brought out, old and cracked, their hides worn by salt and time. From doorways came metal bowls, bamboo flutes, conch shells, everything that could produce noise. The oldest woman among them lifted her hand and began to strike the first rhythm. Slow, deliberate, echoing the heartbeat of the earth itself. The children joined, clapping in uneven patterns, and soon the night filled with rough music, desperate and alive. The sound spread across the shores, leaping from island to island faster than wind. Everywhere, the people joined, striking pots, stamping their feet, shouting the names of the 7 moons. The air resounded with chaotic harmony. Fear transformed into defiance. The sea trembled in response, its waves writhing like living veins. For every sound made by the mortals, the Bakunawa twisted in agitation above the rising waters, its great wings of fin and storm beating against the rhythm that dared to challenge it. The Babaylans, sensing the ancient power returning, began to chant above the uproar. Their voices wove through the drumming like threads of light. They invoked Bathala, the creator, calling for protection of his final jewel. Their chants were not polished incantations, but visceral cries, the raw merging of faith and survival. In their frenzy, some beat the gongs until their hands bled, believing that pain itself could amplify the sound that might save the world. This was no ritual now. It was rebellion against silence. The Bakunawa roared in frustration, its cry colliding with the din of the islands. It lifted halfway into the air, the motion pulling massive columns of seawater upward around its body. Lightning crackled without clouds, illuminating the dragon's form in radiant flashes. For a moment, the beast hovered between realms, sea and sky, longing in ruin. And then it struck, surging toward the final moon with a force that tore the horizon open like fabric. The world seemed to stop as its shadow crossed the sky. Villagers screamed and struck their drums faster, louder. Their rhythm filled the dark like a living wall. The moon began to fade, but did not vanish entirely. Somewhere, between the pounding of 1,000 hands and the howl of the wind, something shifted. The sound was no longer human nor divine. It became primordial, an agreement written into the bones of the earth. The dragon hesitated, as though the clamor reminded it of something once forgotten, the balance that even gods must obey. The light above flickered and then flared. In that instant, the moon's glow transformed. It did not cower or fade, but pulsed outward in waves of pale brilliance. The Bakunawa recoiled, its body thrashing in agony. The noise of the people grew louder still, merging with the rhythm of the heavens themselves. From the sea's depths to the highest peaks, the sound carried forward, a roar of life pushing back against the endless hunger of the abyss. And within that roar, the creature faltered. Bathala's presence filled the void, unseen yet undeniable. The wind turned sharp and golden, the sea flashing with currents of light. The Babaylans cried out as the divine manifested through their breath. The moon, now blazing with unnatural clarity, released a beam that pierced the dragon's open mouth. The Bakunawa shrieked, a sound that split the night in two. Its scales lost their luster, peeling away into streams of broken brilliance that sank into the ocean's depths. It turned, defeated, thrashing as it vanished once more beneath the waves. Silence returned slowly, like dawn over a devastated battlefield. The people looked upward. The moon shone brighter than ever before, unmarred and luminous. Some wept openly, while others simply collapsed, their exhaustion blending with relief. The waves gentled themselves, retreating back to familiar tides. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the ocean sounded calm. The world had survived the final hunger, though at a cost none could measure. In the aftermath, the villagers gathered by the shoreline. They stared at the horizon, expecting to see the dragon return, but the sea remained still. The oldest Babaylan declared that the noise had driven it away, that the rhythm of mortal unity had accomplished what prayer alone could not. They named the rite Tungulog, the sound that saves the moon. From that night onward, it became law. When the sky darkens and the moon begins to fade, the living must not weep or cower. They must make noise, a declaration that they will not surrender the light. Time passed, and the legend spread through every island, reshaped by tongues and generations. Children were taught to keep a drum beside their beds, and fishermen carried gongs in their boats, ready for any hint of eclipse. Festivals grew around the ritual, blending sacred duty with celebration. The sound that saves the moon transformed fear into faith, a communal memory sealed by rhythm. Even those who doubted the gods honored the tradition, for in the shared pulse of noise, they found unity beyond belief. Yet, within the lore's quiet spaces, lingered an unsettling question. Did the Bakunawa truly flee? Or did it only rest until silence returned? The elders said the dragon sleeps beneath the deepest trench, dreaming of moons long devoured. In those dreams, it hears echoes of the human noise that once defied it. Some nights, when the ocean is too still, the water seems to pulse faintly to that remembered rhythm. Perhaps it dreams not of conquest, but of the strange music that once stopped it. Thus, the sound that saved the moon became more than protection. It became remembrance. It reminded mortals that even the smallest voice had weight when joined by others, that unity itself could shape the fates of gods and monsters. And somewhere, between the echoes of drums and the lapping of waves, the spirit of the Bakunawa still listens. Neither enemy nor friend, but witness to the truth that even endless hunger can be silenced by the courage of the living. In the years that followed the defiance of the Bakunawa, a new age dawned upon the islands, an age not of gods, but of remembrance. The people had survived the dragon's wrath and learned that noise, unity, and faith could bend even cosmic power. Yet, survival did not breed certainty. It birthed vigilance. Every generation feared the silence that might herald the dragon's return. And from that fear emerged devotion, skill, and the forging of sacred instruments meant to echo the power of that first rebellion. The world had learned its rhythm, and rhythm became its weapon. The villagers, artisans, and spiritual leaders came together to transform the lesson of sound into an art of defense. Bronze, the gift of fire and earth, became the favored medium. It was said that the first gong was shaped not in a forge, but beside the sea itself, where volcanic stones met salt water and thunder rolled in the distance. The blacksmiths worked under the guidance of Babaylans, their hammers striking in a deliberate cadence believed to scare away spirits lurking beyond sight. Every gong, every drum, every bronze bowl was consecrated with song before it touched human hands. These were not mere tools, but living relics of resistance. From the smallest village to the grandest settlement, each community developed its own instruments and rituals. Some hung great bronze discs in their town centers, striking them only during eclipses or storms, when the sky turned against them. Others fashioned conch horns and elongated drums, mimicking the heartbeat of the earth as they played in unison. Over time, these sounds became both prayer and proclamation, a proclamation that humanity would never again yield the night without song. The legend of the Bakunawa was not buried in fear, but strengthened through repetition, hammered into bronze, and carried in human breath. The Babaylans, still keepers of the lore, guided these rituals with precision and reverence. They taught that every sound had a purpose, every note a force. A low tone was meant to anchor courage, while a high-pitched cry called light back from retreat. The striking of metal upon metal was not chaos, but language, an invocation that the world remembered its balance. Before each ceremony, priests would draw patterns of coral dust on the ground, forming spirals and circles that symbolized the eternal dialogue between sea and sky. They reminded the people that noise without meaning was hollow, but sound born of devotion could echo through eternity. Children grew up learning the signals of the ritual long before they could read the stars. They learned to strike the drums when the tide grew restless, to call upon the gongs when the wind whispered too softly. To grow up beneath the ever-watching moon meant to inherit the burden of remembrance. Songs of the dragon were sung to lull infants to sleep, turning danger into cradle verse. Each generation, by learning the rhythm, became a guardian of the boundary that kept the heavens and the abyss apart. In time, this culture of defense evolved into artistry. The great artisans of Panay and Cebu began to craft extravagant gongs adorned with serpentine carvings, each one a depiction of the Bakunawa itself, bound in circles of fire and cloud. Their surfaces shimmered with hand-etched prayers, so detailed that to strike them was to summon thunder from polished metal. Travelers from distant islands came to trade for these instruments, believing they held power to keep misfortune at bay. In this way, myth became commodity, yet the reverence remained sincere. Even in trade, the people understood they were exchanging not goods, but fragments of protection. Ritual combat became an extension of the old songs. Competitions were held during full moons, where fighters wielded their blades in choreographed movements that mirrored waves and wind. Each step represented the cosmic cycle of devouring and release. The clang of metal against metal sounded like an orchestra of protection, echoing across valleys and cliffs. These exhibitions were not wars, but prayers. Their purpose not victory, but remembrance. The act of movement itself became an act of faith. Over centuries, the ritual of making sound evolved into a philosophy, the doctrine of resonance. It taught that harmony was the truest form of defense, that balance between opposing forces could shield the world as surely as bronze shields a chest. Followers believed that disharmony invited chaos, the very echo of the dragon's hunger. Musicians, artisans, and warriors alike were trained in this discipline, learning to perceive vibration itself as a spiritual pulse connecting all life. Through this lens, the Bakunawa's defeat was not the victory of light over dark, but of balance over excess. In secret gatherings near river mouths and caves, the doctrine's sages taught hopeful disciples the deeper mystery of sound. They claimed that even the gods respond to rhythm, that divinity itself sways to the quiet beat of mortal hearts in unison. These gatherings produced new myths, stories of invisible bridges made of song, connecting distant islands during eclipses. Those who walked these sonic bridges in spirit spoke of seeing Bakunawa coiled in distant abysses, its eyes dim, listening as though haunted by the music it once feared. The dragon had become the symbol not of terror, but of restraint. But for all their wisdom, fear remained humanity's inevitable companion. There were still nights when the sky darkened unexpectedly, when clouds moved like serpents and waves rose without wind. On such nights, the people would gather again at the shore, each person striking their gong or drum with trembling hands. The sound rolled far into the distance, not just to protect the moon, but to remind themselves that they still remembered. The Bakunawa never reappeared, but the world had learned that vigilance itself was sacred, a living boundary carved from faith. The islands became known to travelers as the singing archipelago, for even the act of waiting for dawn became accompanied by steady rhythms. The songs were heard not only during eclipses, but during birth, harvest, and death. Every joy and sorrow had its percussion, its resonance, its bronze echo. In this way, sound transformed into order, an audible manifestation of the world's will to endure. Even silence gained meaning, because silence meant readiness, the pause before the heartbeat resumes. One tale tells of an ancient bronze gong, said to be the oldest in all the islands, hidden deep within a temple by the sea. It is struck only once every generation, when the priests sense imbalance returning to the world. They say its tone carries across the horizon, a call that even the sea itself cannot ignore. Some nights, fishermen claim to hear that low, trembling note drifting across the water. When asked what it sounds like, they answer the same. It sounds like the heartbeat of the world reminding itself that it is still alive. The legacy of the noise that once saved the moon became more than myth. It became identity. To be born under the moonlight meant inheriting both fear and resilience, a birthright forged in resonance. The people no longer asked when the dragon might return, but how they might continue to sing should it rise again. For in their hands, they held the same weapons forged generations before: bronze and belief, music and memory. And as long as they struck the gongs in rhythm with their hearts, they knew that even the stars would listen. There are nights when the sky still trembles with faint echoes of the past, when the stars shimmer as if disturbed by unseen tides. For those who remember, these are the hours when the story of the Bakunawa shifts from myth to meaning, from terror to understanding. The ancients once believed the dragon devoured moons to quench its hunger for light. Yet over time, the line between legend and observation began to blur. Humanity, always reaching for reason within mystery, began to look upward and seek the truth hidden in the heavens. The people who watched the heavens learned to measure patterns among the stars. They saw the repetition of eclipses, the alignment of celestial bodies, and the rhythm that echoed through the cosmos. A new kind of priest emerged, not one who called upon spirits, but one who studied light and shadow with disciplined wonder. And yet, even as they charted orbits and predicted eclipses, they did not discard the old tales. They saw that the myth of the Bakunawa was not ignorance, but early wisdom, a story woven to explain and endure the incomprehensible. To them, the Bakunawa was a metaphor made alive. The act of the dragon devouring the moon mirrored the celestial dance of eclipse and restoration. When the earth cast its shadow upon the moon, they said it was the dragon's great jaw closing. When the light returned, humanity's defiance had once again prevailed. The story became a bridge, uniting faith and observation, myth and... The world no longer feared the darkness entirely. It studied it, while still trembling at its beauty. In the Philippines, the night sky became a chronicle of both celestial motion and divine drama. The constellations were seen as notes in Bathala's grand design, each one speaking a different tone within the eternal symphony. The 7 moons that once graced creation were reinterpreted through the language of stars, a constellation of 7 radiant bodies, said to form the shape of a serpentine figure coiling around the heavens. The people named this pattern the celestial Bakunawa, believing it to be a reminder etched across eternity. Those who gazed upon it spoke of its duel. Some saw a monster eternally chasing the moon across the sky, forever doomed to hunger without fulfillment. Others saw a guardian, watching over the light it once tried to claim, now bearing silent witness to the balance of the universe. In both readings, the dragon no longer represented destruction, but transformation. How envy can become understanding and fear, devotion. Thus, the stars themselves became scriptures written in shimmer and motion. Generations of stargazers began to craft myths that blended with early astronomy. They noticed how the moon followed predictable paths, appearing in the same places each year, almost as if retracing its steps to test whether its old foe still waited below. The eclipse became not a threat, but a reunion, a dance between predator and prey transformed into partners of celestial rhythm. What once was terror became anticipation, and the people's songs changed tone. No longer desperate cries, they became hymns of awe, sung softly under the shadowed moon. Scholars, centuries later, would decode the poetic precision hidden within these ancient interpretations. They realized that the pre-colonial storytellers were not lost in superstition. They were preserving a cosmological record of astonishing accuracy. The description of the Bakunawa's rise and fall aligned closely with the observable behavior of lunar cycles. The myths of the 7 moons could be traced to real phenomena. The phases, the eclipses, the color shifts during totality. Each one translated into narrative language so vivid that centuries could not erode it. The story was both and spell. In temples and observatories, the connection between ritual and reason deepened. Even priests who charted the sky with bamboo instruments would pause to whisper prayers during their work. To name the moon's shadow was not enough. They needed to feel its purpose. They saw in each eclipse an act of renewal, a rehearsal of unity between humankind and the vast unknown. When the light vanished, it reminded them that understanding always begins in darkness. When it returned, it reaffirmed that enlightenment is never permanent. It must be reclaimed night after night. As the centuries passed, humanity's reach expanded beyond myth. The dragon was still feared by name, but now revered in spirit. Mariners navigating the archipelago watched for the patterns of the stars that resembled the serpent's coiled body. Farmers planted by lunar cycles, guided by the same rhythms described in the old songs. The myth, though reinterpreted, remained alive, embedded within calendars, seafaring traditions, and art. Even those who no longer believed still carried its image in their culture's pulse. Artists painted the Bakunawa in constellations of silver and blue curling around the edge of the sky. In one depiction, found carved upon driftwood, the dragon is not devouring the moon, but holding it gently in its claws as if protecting a fragile flame. This image became emblematic of an enduring truth, that even the forces we fear may become guardians in time. As the people understood more of the heavens, they realized their myths had always been less about monsters and more about humans' dialogue with awe. During eclipses, the great gatherings continued, echoing rituals older than memory. But with every generation, those rituals took new shapes, less frantic, more celebratory. Children laughed as they struck pots and drums, their elders teaching them that noise was no longer just protection, but homage. When the shadow crept across the lunar surface, the people chanted not to banish the dragon, but to honor it for keeping the world in motion. Their noise had changed meaning. It had evolved alongside understanding. One might imagine standing beneath that same moon now, feeling both scientist and believer within the same breath. Modern astronomers track the lunar shadow with precision, predicting the exact moment of totality. Yet when the sky dims, silence still falls before the applause, before the awe. In those moments, technology yields to instinct. Eyes lift, and for an instant, the horizon feels alive again. The myth breathes quietly beneath the hum of telescopes, ancient and unashamed. The Bakunawa, through the lens of time, has become more than a dragon. It is a reflection of humanity's ceaseless search for meaning. It embodies the desire to bridge fear with wonder, to find beauty even in darkness. Where one generation saw a predator, another saw a teacher. The myth's endurance proves that, and story are not enemies, but companions. Two forms of curiosity chasing the same truth across different skies. And in their chase, both create constellations that guide humanity toward understanding. Some philosophers of the islands still teach that the Bakunawa did not vanish after its defeat. It ascended, its essence scattered across the firmament as the constellation humanity now watches. Its body became the long curve of faint stars marking the southern horizon, its eyes the twin points of light near the center of the Milky Way. They say when the world grows too quiet, the constellation shifts subtly. A reminder to raise our voices, to live loudly against the tide of stillness. To look up is to remember the power of sound forged in fear, reborn in reverence. Today, modern festivals still echo this cosmic memory. On eclipse nights, entire cities dim their lights, allowing the shadow to pass unbroken. Wherever people gather, the drums still sound, not in panic, but in celebration of continuity. Children learn that noise once saved the moon. Now it honors its cycles. The Bakunawa continues to live, not in hiding, but carved in the stars and written in the rhythm of every heart that beats beneath them. Thus, the dragon in the stars watches not with hunger, but with patience. It guards the border between myth and understanding, forever reminding humanity that even the darkest moments are reflections of light. The heavens remain a mirror where story and converge, each illuminating the other. And when the next eclipse paints the sky in shadow, listen closely, not for fear, but for the music of creation echoing once more through the cosmos, where dragon and moon still dance in endless balance. The story of the Bakunawa did not belong to one voice or one island alone. Like the sea that connected the archipelago, its myth traveled with the tides, reshaped by every community it touched. From the northern coasts where the wind howled across gray waters, to the southern reefs glowing beneath endless sun, each people told the same story differently. The dragon was constant, but its meaning shifted like the current. What one island saw as a god of destruction, another hailed as a guardian of order. In Bicol, elders spoke of the Bakunawa as a celestial serpent, a being once radiant and divine. They said it had been a protector of the heavens, assigned to watch the 7 moons created by Bathala. But over time, admiration turned into envy, and it swallowed the moons in longing to keep their beauty all for itself. In this version, the creature's act was not rebellion, but heartbreak, a tragedy of love twisted into hunger. There, the lunar eclipses were regarded as moments of sadness, not threat. and the people lit candles rather than struck drums, offering light to soothe its pain. Farther south in the Visayas, the story darkened. The Bakunawa was no longer a heavenly serpent, but a sea demon born from chaos, the embodiment of storms. Its body was said to stretch from one horizon to another, its mouth large enough to drink the moon whole. When eclipses came, the people gathered on the shores with gongs and shouts, believing the noise would frighten the monster back beneath the waves. Yet even in fear, they recognized its power as necessary. Without the dragon, the moon's return would hold no meaning. What they dreaded was also what completed the cycle. In the islands of Mindanao, a different name echoed: the Naga. Here, the serpent was seen not as destroyer, but as divine keeper of balance. The Naga could ascend or descend between worlds at will, controlling water, fertility, and celestial motion. When it swallowed the moon, it was cleansing the sky, devouring debris from creation and returning order to the cosmos. The people of these lands did not fight its coming. They celebrated it, bathing the moonlight's return as a blessing for their crops and rivers. Their legend was not one of fear, but gratitude toward a creature misunderstood by others. Still, there were wilder tales. Versions told by those who lived far from the coasts, where sea and sky met only through memory. Among mountain tribes, the Bakunawa was said to be a chained spirit imprisoned beneath volcanic lakes, punished by Bathala for desiring more than it was meant to hold. Each tremor of the earth, each eruption, was its futile attempt to rise again. To these people, the dragon symbolized the yearning buried within all creation, the ache of every being that has glimpsed perfection and been denied it. Their rituals sought not to weaken the dragon, but to calm it, offering smoke and song to ease eternal restraint. Despite their differences, these many tales converged on one truth. The Bakunawa remained a mirror of humanity's own contradictions. It could be sacred or monstrous, benevolent or cursed, depending on who told its name. In Cebu, it was depicted as a woman, a goddess whose serpentine body hid her beauty from mortal eyes. In Panay, it bore wings like a tempest, representing freedom and rebellion against celestial authority. Even its purpose varied. Some said it devoured moons out of anger. Others said it protected them from jealous spirits who sought to destroy Bathala's creation. Every version reshaped the same divine hunger into meaning. The diversity of the myth reflected the landscapes themselves. Each island, shaped by volcano, jungle, and sea, mirrored a different temperament of the same cosmos. Where lightning struck mountains, the Bakunawa was seen as punishment. Where soft coral whispered beneath calm tides, it was seen as blessing. The Filipino imagination, ever porous and adaptive, allowed the dragon to live 1,000 lives at once. No single tale erased another. They coexisted like islands in an ocean of story, each one holding its own truth. The traders who sailed between shores became unwitting storytellers, carrying variations of the myth across the islands. What began as whispers around fires evolved into chants echoed from port to port. Legends mingled with reality as they traveled. The Bakunawa became a map, not of geography, but of belief. Through it, distant communities found connection. They might speak in different tongues, worship different spirits. Yet when the world dimmed under an eclipse, every shore shared the same primal sound, the beat of drums calling back the light. Even under foreign rule, the myth endured. When new faiths arrived, bringing new gods and scriptures, the story of the dragon refused to disappear. Priests condemned it as superstition, yet villagers continued to tell it, weaving it into hymns disguised as prayers. They reimagined Bathala as the Christian god and the Bakunawa as a fallen angel yearning for redemption. The old drums were replaced with church bells that rang during eclipses, not in defiance of the church, but in silent memory of what once was. Thus, myth survived through transformation, adapting to the rhythm of conquest itself. Art evolved alongside these retellings. In ancient carvings found on wooden boats and woven into cloth, the Bakunawa appeared coiled around moons and stars, its tongue turned into a lightning bolt. In murals across the islands, painters depicted it not as villain, but as balance incarnate, a creature that consumes only to release again. The people who once feared its shadow now wore its image as protection. Small amulets shaped like serpents were passed down through generations, carved from bone or shell. Symbols of resilience and reverence entwined. In modern times, the regional variations of the myth became a source of cultural pride. Folklorists gathered the stories, comparing their shapes and meanings like fragments of a vast mirror. They noted that every interpretation, no matter how distant, carried the same undercurrent: humanity's effort to reconcile power with beauty, envy with salvation. The Bakunawa was not only a cosmic entity, it was the embodiment of the Filipino experience of perseverance, adaptation, and hope. To study its legends was to understand the soul of the islands themselves. Even today, during lunar eclipses, different regions keep their traditions alive in their own way. In Bicol, candles still flicker on windowsills to soothe the dragon's sorrow. In the Visayas, drums thunder from the beaches, echoing the defiance of their ancestors. In Mindanao, prayers rise softly like smoke, thanking the Naga for balance restored. Each response carries centuries of evolution, proof that myth can adapt as readily as the sea changes its tides. The same dragon still moves between them, invisible but never absent. The variations of the Bakunawa across the islands reveal more than diversity. They reveal unity through difference. Like the languages spoken across the archipelago, the myth's dialects interlace into one living narrative. It is the story of a people who have never forgotten to look upward, who learned that to face the dark is not to eliminate it, but to harmonize with it. The dragon's changing face across the islands mirrors the dynamic of belief itself, capable of transformation without loss. The tale continues, infinite as the sea that binds the islands together. Thus, the Bakunawa endures, not as one legend, but as many, breathing differently with every shore it touches. Its body, invisible yet eternal, winds between cultures like a current linking hearts and histories. When the moon darkens and the waves shimmer under its shadow, every island, every voice, and every tradition join once more in the same unspoken understanding that beneath all difference lies shared wonder. The same dragon that once devoured the moons now unites the archipelago in the rhythm of memory, echoing across time and tide as the eternal guardian of the Filipino soul. Centuries after the last eclipse faded from the terrified eyes of early villagers, the Bakunawa remained alive, not as a lurking monster beneath the sea, but as a rhythm pulsing through culture, art, and celebration. What began as collective fear became the foundation of identity. The dragon's name, once whispered at night to ward away darkness, was now shouted under the glare of fireworks and drums. Myths evolved into memory, and memory transformed into movement. Across the Philippine Islands, the creature that once symbolized danger had become an emblem of unity and rebirth. Festivals dedicated to the Bakunawa sprouted in the modern age like echoes of ancient songs. The most vivid blooms of this resurrection emerged in the Visayas, where the serpent's legend had once merged with coastal rituals of survival. The Pintados Kasadyan of Leyte, the Bulan festival of Sorsogon, and countless local celebrations carry traces of the legend, blending ancestral reverence with the color and noise of contemporary life. Through street parades, dance, and song, the dragon now rises again, not from the abyss, but from the collective imagination of a people who refuse to let it sink into oblivion. At first glance, these festivals appear joyous, exuberant, even defiant. Bodies painted in swirling blues and silvers move in synchronized rhythm, mimicking waves and scales. Giant effigies of serpents slither through crowded streets, their paper bodies shimmering under the tropical sun. Drummers beat patterns that echo the ancient cadence of fear, transformed into celebration. Every sound, every gesture, is a reenactment, not of conquest, but of transformation. Through dance, the people recall how terror once shaped their courage. The Bulan festival, named after the moon goddess who survived the Bakunawa's hunger, offers the most poignant example. In its performances, the goddess descends from the heavens to reclaim her position in the night sky, triumphing not through violence, but compassion. Actors wrapped in fabric portraying scales perform alongside dancers wielding bronze shields, representing the humans who once created sound to save her light. The choreography weaves myth with memory. The eternal battle between fear and faith, retold as celebration. The rhythm of the drums mirrors the heartbeat of survival, that ancient cadence reborn through movement. In these public rituals, the line between worship and art disappears entirely. The beating drums no longer summon divinity. They awaken lineage. Children born into modern cities, who may never have heard their grandparents' folk songs, learn through the festivals what their ancestors once feared and overcame. The myth becomes education. The dance becomes archive. And when spectators raise their hands to the sky during the festival's climax, as the dragon figure coils across the crowd, they reenact the primal union of human noise and heavenly power. Artisans across the archipelago channel the Bakunawa into sculpture, textile, and paint. In Bicol, gifted metalworkers forge ornate dragon pendants from brass, symbolizing protection against adversity. Contemporary painters depict the serpent in galaxies of color, coiling not around moons, but around human hearts. In these creative acts, the myth endures not as superstition, but as philosophy. Each piece reminding its witness that darkness cannot exist without illuminating what resists it. Even graffiti artists, decorating city walls, use the dragon's form as symbol of resistance and endurance, turning back the old fear with urban creativity. Modern scholars see these transformations as living proof of cultural resilience. The story of the Bakunawa, they argue, is not frozen in time but fluid, adapting to every generation's struggles. Under colonial rule, the tale survived as coded metaphor for defiance against oppression, a creature trying to reclaim its freedom from divine tyranny. In the post-colonial era, its image evolved again, reflecting a new form of independence, emotional, social, and artistic. Through myth, Filipinos found continuity where history had been fragmented. The dragon became a mirror, shimmering with both wound and wisdom. The festivals also carry undertones of environmental awareness. Fishermen and environmentalists alike invoke the Bakunawa during coastal cleanups, reminding the community of its connection to the sea. The dragon, once a symbol of chaotic hunger, has become emblem of as fragile power. Murals show it not devouring the moon, but carrying it. Its scales now pearls, its gaze tranquil. Children learning the story today are told that the Bakunawa represents balance, warning humanity to honor the waters beneath their feet. In an age of ecological threat, the ancient legend finds new relevance. Across islands, storytellers continue to breathe life into the myth, adapting it to fresh media. In theaters, actors perform modern plays where the dragon's hunger is portrayed as longing for belonging. In animated films, Bakunawa becomes a misunderstood guardian of cosmic order. Digital artists illuminate the creature among stars in surreal visions of light. Through these interpretations, it no longer remains bound to ancient fear, but ascends into the realm of global symbolism, an emblem of the universal struggle to reconcile destruction and creation. The dragon's shadow crosses not only the moon, but human imagination itself. To the villagers who still practice age-old rituals during eclipses, the presence of these festivals is not contradiction, but continuation. They see in the parades the same purpose their ancestors once held in drum and chant: the preservation of harmony. When a teacher explains the eclipse, a grandmother might nod and say that is simply Bathala's language made visible. In this way, rational understanding coexists with mythic expression. The people do not choose between them. They let both truths sing in the same key. The festival, like the legend, becomes a bridge between worlds. Perhaps the most striking evolution of the Bakunawa myth lies in its symbolism within identity. It has grown from being a myth of survival into a narrative of belonging. Filipinos scattered across the world celebrate derivatives of these festivals, carrying the story as a link to their ancestral home. In foreign cities, painted faces and rhythmic beats echo the same call that once sounded on island shores centuries ago. The dragon that once rose from the sea now travels through memory across oceans, reminding each listener that heritage is not a place, but a pulse that never ceases to beat. The imagery of the Bakunawa also reaches into popular culture. Writers incorporate it into poems of love and loss, comparing the dragon's hunger to emotional longing. Musicians use its name in ballads about returning home. Even fashion designers weave its image into modern garments, turning the coils of myth into patterns of beauty. Through these reinventions, the dragon continues to evolve, no longer confined to folklore, but reborn as symbol of creativity, an enduring dance between ancient reverence and modern reinvention. Thus, the Bakunawa thrives not as relic, but as revelation, the embodiment of transformation across centuries. Where once it devoured, it now inspires. Where once it terrified, it now unites. The festivals that bear its name remind the world that nothing truly vanishes when remembered with intent. The myth began with darkness swallowing light, but it ends with light embracing darkness in dance. And as fireworks replace the roar of storms, the Bakunawa lives on, not in the depths below, but among the hearts that dared to turn fear into song. Every myth endures because it contains more than a story. It contains a reflection. To speak of the Bakunawa is to speak of humanity itself. For in its serpentine form lies everything beautiful and terrible about the human condition. It is the hunger for light, the envy of beauty, the awe of creation, and the struggle to balance destruction with meaning. Through the dragon, the Filipinos have long seen their own complexity staring back at them, a being neither wholly divine nor monstrous, but caught forever in the act of becoming. In this chapter of understanding, the Bakunawa ceases to be only myth. It becomes metaphor. When Bathala breathed the 7 moons into existence, the act symbolized abundance, harmony, and order. The dragon's decision to devour them was not mere hunger. It was yearning, the insatiable longing for what one cannot possess. To devour light is an act of rebellion, but also of admiration, twisted by despair. Thus, the creature becomes the mirror of human ambition, forever chasing what shines beyond reach, forever punished and transformed by the act. Human beings have always feared their own enormity. The Bakunawa, immense and infinite beneath the sea, reminds them of the desires that can drown entire worlds. Yet even as the myth warns against greed and envy, it also speaks to compassion. The same impulse that drives the dragon to destroy, the urge to unite with beauty, is the same force that compels humanity toward creation. In this duality, the creature becomes neither sin nor salvation, but equilibrium. The abyss and the heavens coexist within its coiling form. Cultural scholars often interpret the Bakunawa as a representation of emotional truth concealed beneath cosmic story. The dragon devouring the moon echoes the human heart devouring its serenity when seized by jealousy or despair. Every eclipse becomes a metaphor for the chaos that descends when desire exceeds its boundaries. The ancient ritual of noise, the beating of drums and shouting of voices, can then be read as an allegory for awakening. The act of making sound to remind oneself not to drown in silence. Humanity drives away the darkness, not just from the sky, but from its own depths. It is no coincidence that throughout the islands, the dragon's story merges seamlessly with moral philosophy. The people who live surrounded by sea know better than anyone the price of imbalance. They understand that water gives life, but can also drown it, just as power can heal or corrupt. In their telling, the Bakunawa's fate is not eternal damnation, but eternal learning. It remains beneath the waves, not banished, but reflective, its silence a contemplative exile. The dragon waits as humans do, yearning for redemption it cannot name. But to call the Bakunawa purely metaphor would deny its spiritual significance. For many, it represents the coalescence of humanity and divine order. The dragon belongs to neither heaven nor earth, standing at the threshold between creation and chaos. It embodies the liminal spaces of existence, the dusk between night and day, the tide between calm and storm, the heartbeat between silence and cry. This threshold is sacred. By understanding the Bakunawa, one learns that life itself is an act of balance, maintained through endless dialogue between opposing truths. The myth also offers a psychological portrait of transformation. The dragon's hunger destroys, yes, but it also forges resilience. Each time it fails to keep the moon, the creature learns another facet of humility. Its punishment is repetition, the endless cycle of attempt and surrender, longing and loss. And so it mirrors the human cycle of error and awakening. Every generation reenacts this struggle, conquering shadows through art, faith, and will, only to meet new darkness with renewed courage. The lesson is not to eradicate desire, but to guide it toward illumination. Artists across centuries have echoed this truth through their craft. Sculptors carve the Bakunawa, coiling around its moons, its teeth poised not to consume, but to cradle. Poets reframe its hunger as worship. Painters depict its shadow as gentle silhouette against starlight. In each expression, the serpent is seen not as villain, but as vessel of emotion, the visualization of longing turned luminous. Art thus becomes the mirror polished by myth itself, reflecting how humanity transforms fear into form, chaos into creation. The dragon, once cursed, becomes muse. In the context of Philippine spirituality, the myth reminds the faithful of compassion not only for gods, but for imperfection. The Bakunawa's failure is forgivable because it is understood. It acts out of yearning, not malice. In this interpretation, Bathala's cosmos is not ruled by wrath, but by understanding. Balance requires both the devourer and the devoured, both silence and sound. Humanity's rituals of noise, their celebrations and festivals, exist not to banish the dragon permanently, but to remind it and themselves that redemption is found through remembrance, not denial. To see the Bakunawa in this light is to recognize the interconnectedness of all fear and beauty. The myth becomes a timeless meditation on restraint and release. Each culture that passed it down added new meaning, refining the scales of reflection until the creature glittered with lessons more enduring than any doctrine. Its story outlasted kingdoms, invasions, and modern skepticism because it speaks to something universal: the fragile balance between admiring the world and desiring to own it. Even in the present age, when the eclipse's shadow can be calculated precisely and it's explained, the old terror has not vanished. It merely transformed into awe. People still gather, still lift their eyes to watch the moon bleed into shadow, still feel wonder stir in their bones. In that moment, the rational mind gives way to something older, a recollection of the night when the dragon consumed heaven's light. And once again, the heart sees itself reflected above, devouring and releasing the beauty it cannot hold. Philosophers interpret the Bakunawa myth as the first articulation of ethical coexistence between humanity, between knowledge and reverence. The creature's defeat was not absolute. It was transmutation. Each age of fear produces its own monsters, and each monster becomes legend when humanity learns what it came to teach. The dragon symbolizes this eternal cycle. Where others see destruction, the wise see dialogue. The myth tells us that even the devourer carries a lesson within its jaws. In a deeper sense, the Bakunawa is also an image of time itself. Just as the dragon consumes and releases the moon, humanity consumes and releases moments, chasing permanence in a world built on change. To gaze upon the moon revived after an eclipse is to understand impermanence as gift. Darkness will always return, but it is temporary. Light, though fragile, always finds its way back. The rhythm of eclipses reminds mortals that they are living inside the dragon's breath, each exhale a sunrise, each inhale a sunset. The story also resonates in modern reflection, especially in an age that once again teeters upon imbalance. Humanity's hunger for progress mirrors the Bakunawa's hunger for light, noble in desire, but perilous in excess. The world's oceans warm, forests fade, and skies dim, not because the dragon returns, but because humanity has inherited its appetite. The myth, in this context, reawakens as warning and guide. It urges moderation, patience, and reverence, teaching that to devour what sustains you is to invite darkness once again. Ultimately, the Bakunawa is not punished, nor is it redeemed. It simply continues. It sleeps beneath the waves as reminder and witness, dreaming of lost moons, listening for the drums of mortals above. Its story endures because it allows both gods and men to exist in the same breath of imperfection. Each retelling reshapes its fate, each generation adding new scales to its body. Through the dragon, humans remember their dual inheritance, the power to destroy and to restore. What remains, after all the centuries, is not the image of the dragon devouring light, but of humanity finding its reflection within that devouring. The Bakunawa mirrors every conflict between faith and doubt, every heartbeat that trembles between silence and expression. When one looks upon the moon, one does not only see the heavens, they see themselves, luminous and fleeting, whole and wounded. To know the Bakunawa is to know the balance within existence itself, that creation and destruction are not opposites, but twin faces of the same eternal truth. Every era tells the Bakunawa story anew, whispering its scales back to life when the moon darkens and memory stirs. Even now, under the glare of modern cities and electric constellations, there are nights when the old terror hums just beneath the surface of the world. Humanity has explained the eclipse, tamed the darkness, mapped the heavens, but the pulse that once beat through drums still lingers in collective blood. The myth survives because truth never dies, only transforms. And some silences, even now, are louder than any roar from the deep. To the ancient Filipinos, the Bakunawa was both a being and a cycle. Its rise was not destruction, but notification, a reminder that all light is temporary and all balance demands vigilance. Today, when the moon begins its rare red descent, crowds no longer cower, cameras replace gongs, and digital noise replaces the cries of fear. Yet underneath those human gestures lies the same undercurrent of reverence. Every flash of wonder across a face lit by the eclipse carries within it the shadow of centuries past, when the world's end seemed to hang on a dragon's hunger. The idea of the Bakunawa returning no longer evokes dread alone. For the poets and the thinkers of our time, the dragon's resurgence is symbolic, the reawakening of the ancient consciousness we have almost buried. In a world that moves too fast, that hungers endlessly for creation and control, the myth rises to question our balance. Are we not too becoming like the dragon, devouring what nourishes us in our pursuit of beauty, power, and light? The tale reclaims relevance, whispering in the static hum of civilization that the cosmic cycle is repeating, not in the sky, but in the human heart. Imagine humanity as the modern Bakunawa, gazing upward at the luminous orb of progress, desperate to claim it. We consume resources, devour oceans, extinguish forests, our appetite never sated. Once, the dragon was punished for swallowing the moons. Today, it may be reborn in our image. Yet the myth reminds us that redemption is possible, that what is consumed can be replaced with understanding. The dragon that devours can also restore. Every act of destruction still hides a seed of renewal waiting to be heard. In this light, the Bakunawa rises not from the ocean, but from within us. It coils through cities built over coral skeletons, winds through fiber optic veins and digital currents. The sound that once saved the moon now takes the form of culture, storytelling, art, and awareness, each a rhythm that resists silence. Humanity's greatest victory is not that it conquered the myth, but that it learned to keep it alive. The dragon's spirit thrives in renewal, reborn with every song, every eclipse, every gesture of remembrance. Across the islands, some still practice the rituals of noise when the darkness creeps across the moon. They pound drums, clang pots, or simply clap their hands, even when they understand the behind the shadow. It is not fear that drives them, it is connection. In that moment, the ancient and the modern are reconciled. The echo of the drums merges with the hum of traffic, the rush of waves, the pulse of electricity. And somewhere beneath that harmony, the sleeping dragon listens, reminded of the sound that once restored its lost balance. Philosophers have long said that myth is eternal because the questions it raises never find completion. So, it is with the Bakunawa. It asks not whether it will rise again, but whether we will recognize it when it does. Every time humanity tips the scale between reverence and indulgence, a fragment of the dragon stirs. Every time we forget the sacredness of harmony, its shadow lengthens over the world's collective soul. The legend does not predict the end. It mirrors our continuity. The question is not what the dragon will do, but what we have become since it first descended from the waves. Artists, too, anticipate its metaphorical return. Dancers choreograph its rise anew, their movements deliberate and fluid, evoking both terror and tenderness. Musicians compose symphonies that mimic the cycle of omen and renewal, turning ancient rhythm into orchestral defiance. Writers craft epics set in the modern age, where the Bakunawa reappears not as monster, but as conscience. In every art form, the dragon is climbing once again through human imagination, rising through ink and sound, shimmering through fiber and flame. Myth, it seems, cannot die while beauty remembers fear. The festivals that once marked survival have grown into acts of celebration. Cities blaze with lanterns shaped like serpents. Processions weave through streets, echoing with laughter instead of screams. The Bakunawa's return is reenacted not in terror, but in triumph. The moon is no longer victim but companion, descending willingly into the dragon's mouth only to emerge brighter than before. Humanity has learned to reinterpret devouring as embrace, darkness as necessary passage. The myth concludes not with defeat, but with communion. Even religion, in its modern empathy, finds meaning in the dragon's rise. Some liken it to the soul's journey through shadow, a passage through craving into understanding. Others see it as a symbol of divine forgiveness, where even those who fall to envy are offered redemption through enlightenment. The Bakunawa, they say, rose again not because it defied the gods, but because it sought reunion. And so each eclipse becomes a miniature ascension. Light swallowed and reborn, despair turned to awe, silence to song. But the myth also offers warning. For those who look deeper, the dragon's rise is a reminder that history moves in circles as surely as the moon orbits its shadow. Civilizations, like celestial bodies, wax and wane. The arrogance that declares humanity has transcended myth, forgets that every empire, like every eclipse, meets its own obscurity. If we consume without remembrance, the world itself becomes the next devoured moon. The Bakunawa does not threaten us, it imitates us. Its hunger is ours, reflected back through ages of telling. Yet the power of the legend lies not in fear, but in invitation. It calls humanity to participate in the cycle consciously, to meet the shadow without surrendering to it. When we look upon the darkened moon and remember the story, we engage in an ancient pact. That darkness is not the end, but a necessary passage toward renewal. The Bakunawa's rise becomes our rise, not as creature of chaos, but as being of awareness. In myth, we rediscover the harmony we keep losing in progress. And so, on each rare night when the moon is eclipsed, the legend reawakens in 1,000 unseen ways. The waves carry whispers of the dragon's breath. The air tingles with anticipation. The heart swells with something too old to name. The drums may have changed in shape, the noise now more symbolic than desperate. But the meaning endures. We still declare that we remember the balance between fear and courage, between silence and sound. The act itself keeps creation alive. In the final measure, the Bakunawa is less a creature than a state of being. a cosmic teacher woven into the veins of a people who refuse to forget. It survives because it carries both warning and wonder, a myth that humbles as much as it inspires. Perhaps one night, when the moon glows crimson and the sea trembles, the dragon will rise again, not as devourer, but as witness. It will look upon humanity and see its reflection finally peaceful, balanced, and whole. Until then, its story waits, coiled beneath the waves and whispered through centuries, reminding us that every myth, no matter how ancient, exists to prepare us for our own awakening.